Welcome to Realty Success. Our guest expert today, we're so happy to have you with us. It's Liz Barletta, and she's a real estate attorney. She works in Boston and in Florida, and she's going to talk with us today about having a home buying backup plan. So, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. This is a really interesting topic and one that I encounter a lot. So I'm super excited to be here.
Liz, it seems like sometimes things unexpectedly can go wrong during the buying or selling process. From your perspective, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I had a transaction actually this morning that had an unexpected issue. So it was proper timing. So one example in particular, when buying a home, there's a lot of nuance to lead up to what ended up happening at the closing table. However, in Massachusetts in particular, part of our job as an attorney for the buyer is to research the title. So we're going through the history books and the registry of deeds, researching to make sure that there's no clouds on the title or title issues. So basically making sure that the right seller's selling to the buyer, that any mortgages that are outstanding have been satisfied and released with proper documentation, making sure the seller hasn't been sued or there's past due tax. All those things go into our research of the title. On this particular transaction that was closing today, unfortunately, there was something that the seller wasn't able to take care of. So we had to go into emergency mode because people had movers, people had plans and contractors coming. What can we do? How can we still achieve the closing and get the closing completed? When something can or does unexpectedly go wrong at the closing table, there's usually a way to still make it to a closing. We try to figure out a way to still accomplish our goal of closing that particular contract date. Um, so in this particular case, we had something that wouldn't necessarily make our title we call unmarketable. So it was still a clean title, but it was something that we wanted to be cleared up. It was relative to a current. And so in order to still close, we were able to hold back some money from the selling side for the buyer to feel comfortable that the seller would complete this post closing and still close and have the contractors come in and do all the things that the buyer really wanted to do today. That's one example of something unexpected that could happen, even on a closing day, no matter how hard we try to make sure everyone who has their job does their job the right way to get to that table. Sometimes these things happen on a last minute basis, but usually there's a solution. And that's what our team is always, our approach is trying to find the solution to make sure the client feels comfortable, but also meets their goal of closing.
When those things come up, do you find that it's typically on the title side or lending side, or is it?
Great question. So we see it all. We definitely, so in terms of last minute things, they tend to be either title related. I mean, they could be title or lender related, to be honest. It could be that there was a charge made on a credit card or something like that could potentially affect because the lender is required to do a last, credit check to make sure that there's no issues on the credit end. So we've seen things like that that are sort of lender related last minute issues. But generally, I feel like it's a matter of documentation from the selling side, at least in Massachusetts, that we feel like tends to be the reason why there's like a delay in closing or something unexpected like that.
Yeah, nope, that makes sense. I had one where we were not told that the woman purchasing the home was married. Her husband was in Dubai, and she never said she was married through the whole process. And we got to the closing table, and turns out she's married. You know, of course, it delayed closing. We couldn't close. The title and lender said, "No, we can't move forward." And she contacted her attorney to try to get that figured out. What do you recommend in a case like that? Is that a case for an attorney?
Oh, yeah. Our legislature has found that the conducting of a closing is the practice of law, whereas in other states, a title company handles it. So it may not be a situation where you always are interacting with an attorney, but it's very common in Massachusetts to always have a buyer's attorney or have a seller's attorney. There are, of course, situations where you may not necessarily have one on the selling side, or even if the buyer chooses to not have their own personal attorney, but there will still be a bank attorney involved. So from our perspective, it's very typical to from the onset to have an attorney in the transaction. That is 100% a situation where you want to get an attorney involved because they'll just think potentially of outside of the box ways to make it to the closing table. I actually had a similar situation, but on the buying end where I had a client who I didn't realize was actually in the armed forces and was stationed abroad. He was the one who was interacting with me all the time on the transaction. I would talk to him on the phone. I never had an idea that he was outside of the country. And when my wife came to closing, I was like, where's your husband? And she's like, oh, the stations. And thankfully, we had a lender that was able to work quickly, and we got a power of attorney that the most armed forces members have approved within the same day, and we were able to still close on the wife's side. There are things that like that just you can't anticipate. I always talk to my husband about the fact that we need to write a book of all the crazy tales that we've encountered.
Oh, absolutely. So those were great examples on the buy side. What about on the sell side?
So on the sell side, I think really title issues again. I feel like the answer is always title or lending. From the perspective of seller, oftentimes it's a situation where you may not realize that a title issue existed. And if when you purchased the property, it wasn't sort of in fashion to have title insurance, that could pose a problem. I had a client actually who was selling their property and they had been in the property since the 80s and they didn't realize, obviously they wouldn't have necessarily remembered from back then, but the person who represented them in the purchase apparently didn't do a great job in their title research. As I'm sure you've encountered, sometimes when there's family transfers, so father maybe transfers to a son and the son transfers back to the father and then to a trust and then back and forth. And sometimes that happens where within the family, they're sort of the title of the property is transferring hands. But if you're not doing it the right way, that can obviously be a problem. And so in this particular lady's situation, she was selling a house that she'd been occupying and owned for, at that point, 30 years. And the buyer's attorney, when they did their research of the title, found that she only owned 50% of it. And that was because there were transfers made and the proper person wasn't added to the last deed that went to her.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, which it could have been a lot worse. I have to say it was pretty bad in the situation because she was trying to sell. She was already under contract to buy something in cash. So she had no contingencies just to protect her. And thankfully, her seller was able to be flexible with her and extended closing. So it could have been a lot worse. But in that particular situation, I became kind of like a PI, a private investigator. I was trying to find these people because at that point, everyone had passed away. And so they were heirs of this family. Thankfully, they had a very unique last name. And I was able to find one family member in Tampa, one was in Connecticut, and one was in California.
Oh, my.
We didn't ask the seller to pay her them anything. They were just kind enough to sign the deed for that 50%. She was incredibly lucky. In any other situation, people are human. You find out magically they own 50% of a property. In this case, it's with Somerville, Massachusetts, which is a very highly desirable area with really high price point. And they were just kind enough to transfer it to her. So she's able to find and sell the property. But
So,
yeah.
at what point do you get an attorney or title company involved in a situation like that? I'm dealing with one very similar at the moment,
Mhm.
and they're curious on who they need to bring in to facilitate that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the moment you have an inkling that there's some kind of problem or some kind of issue, it's important to contact the real estate attorney just because they may be thinking of a way to strategically find a solution that you just may not have encountered before. So I think that especially in situations relative to title, anything related to even financing and contractual like interpretation, you just really need to contact an attorney right away to be able to guide you through that process. Because at the end of time is money. And oftentimes, especially with real estate transactions, if there's delays, someone's paying for a rate lock extension. If you're going to lose the deal, maybe you're going to make less money on the next one. So it's just important to have someone aligned with you at the onset, I think, of any kind of issue like that, just so time constraints are alleviated.
Fantastic. And to our wonderful guest expert and real estate attorney, Liz, if you'll tell everybody where they can find you.
Our website is easyligras, ligras.com. My profile is there. I'm on Instagram at LizBESQ and great emails, Barletta team at Ligras. But thank you all so much for letting me chat today with you all.
And we'll see everybody again next time. Have a great week.